Throughout the vast expanse of the galaxy, there exists a peculiar reputation that follows humanity wherever we go. A reputation that has alien diplomats speaking in hushed tones and military strategists revising their tactical manuals. It's not our technology, which by galactic standards is relatively young. It's not our numbers. We're actually quite small compared to some of the sprawling empires that dominate the stars. No, what makes other species nervous when they encounter humans is something far more primal. Our capacity for escalation. Our willingness to take conflicts to levels that most sentient species consider excessive. This is the story of how that reputation was earned. How a single miscalculation by an alien empire led to the most devastating response in galactic history. How Earth, when threatened, didn't just fight back, it declared total war. The Vraxian Dominion had conquered 17 star systems before they encountered Earth. Their strategy was always the same: overwhelming force, surgical strikes against military installations, and a quick capitulation from the native species. It had worked flawlessly every time, until us. The Vraxians studied Earth for nearly a decade before making their move. They monitored our broadcasts, analyzed our conflicts, cataloged our weapons. They saw our divisions, nations squabbling over resources, ideologies clashing, politicians more concerned with re-election than planetary defense. They concluded, quite logically by their standards, that humanity would fold quickly under pressure, and they dropped Commonwealth representatives, torrents, gults, and what they failed to understand was that humans don't become weaker when threatened. We become something else entirely. The Vraxian attack began on what would later be known as Dark Monday. Their ships appeared simultaneously over 27 major cities across the globe. There was no warning, no declaration of war, no demands. Just the sudden appearance of massive vessels, hovering silently above our most populated areas. Then came the strikes. Military bases were hit first. Precision attacks that destroyed command centers, airfields, and naval ports. Communications networks went down next, followed by power grids. Within 6 hours, Earth's conventional military response capability had been reduced by an estimated 70%. The Vraxians expected surrender negotiations to begin immediately. Instead, they got their first taste of human resilience. In the chaos of those first attacks, something remarkable happened. The divisions that had defined human society for centuries began to dissolve. Former enemies shared intelligence. Rival nations pooled resources. Civilian infrastructure was repurposed for defense almost overnight. In Seoul, a commercial electronics manufacturer began producing EMP devices within 48 hours of the initial attack. In Brazil, mining equipment was converted to dig massive underground shelters. In Kenya, wildlife tracking systems were reprogrammed to monitor alien ship movements. The Vraxians had expected to face organized military resistance. What they encountered instead was something far more dangerous: decentralized, adaptive, and utterly unpredictable human ingenuity. But the true turning point came 3 days after the initial attack, when the Vraxians made their critical error. Frustrated by the lack of formal surrender, they decided to make an example of a major city. They chose Shanghai, home to over 26 million humans. The destruction was absolute. Where a vibrant metropolis once stood, nothing remained but ash and molten glass. The Vraxians broadcast footage of the devastation globally, expecting it to break human morale. They couldn't have been more wrong. There's an old human saying that the Vraxians should have studied more carefully. Never corner something that's willing to die, taking you with it. The destruction of Shanghai didn't break humanity's will to fight. It removed all restraint. Within hours of the attack, the United Nations convened an emergency session. For the first time in human history, a unanimous resolution was passed without debate or abstention. Its text was simple. Earth is now in a state of total war against the Vraxian aggressors. All resources, all technologies, all human effort is to be directed toward one goal: complete victory, whatever the cost. The concept of total war was alien to the Vraxians. In their 4,000-year history of conquest, they had never encountered a species willing to sacrifice everything: their economy, their environment, their individual lives, to achieve victory. War, to the Vraxians, was a calculated exchange of force to achieve political objectives. To humans, it had become a matter of survival, and humans are never more dangerous than when fighting for survival. The mobilization that followed would have been impossible to predict. Automotive factories switched to producing armored vehicles within days. Pharmaceutical companies redirected all research toward biological agents that might affect Vraxian physiology. University physics departments worked around the clock on theoretical weapons technologies that had previously been deemed too dangerous to pursue. Perhaps most surprising to the Vraxians was humanity's willingness to accept casualties. When they targeted power plants, humans kept them running with volunteer crews who knew they wouldn't survive. When they bombed transportation hubs, new routes were established within hours, often through areas still under active attack. The Vraxian military doctrine relied on breaking an enemy's will through demonstration of superior force. But how do you break the will of a species that responds to devastation not with fear, but with rage? 6 weeks into the invasion, the first human countermeasures began to appear. They weren't sophisticated by galactic standards, but they were brutally effective. Captured Vraxian technology was reverse-engineered with remarkable speed. Weaknesses in their shield harmonics were identified and exploited. Their communication encryption, which had never been broken by any previous species, was compromised by a team of human cryptographers working out of a basement in Bangalore. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source: Earth's entertainment industry. Game designers, science fiction authors, and film special effects teams proved remarkably adept at predicting Vraxian tactical movements and developing countermeasures. Their lifetime of imagining alien invasions suddenly became Earth's most valuable strategic asset. The Vraxians had studied our military. They should have studied our fiction. 73 days after the invasion began, humanity launched its first coordinated counterattack. It wasn't aimed at reclaiming territory or destroying Vraxian ships. It targeted something far more fundamental: their supply lines. The Vraxians, like all invading forces, relied on a complex logistical network. Their ships needed specific fuel compounds, their troops required specialized atmospheric supplements, and their weapons systems depended on rare materials that couldn't be sourced on Earth. Human strike teams, using a combination of captured technology and improvised weapons, began hitting Vraxian supply depots in synchronized attacks across the globe. These weren't military personnel. They were civilians with relevant skills. Mining engineers who understood explosive placement, chemists who could identify critical compounds, hackers who could disrupt security systems. The Vraxian command was stunned. In all their previous conquests, civilian populations had sought safety, not engaged in combat. The concept of non-military personnel voluntarily joining high-risk operations contradicted everything in their strategic doctrine. As the human counteroffensive gained momentum, the Vraxians began to notice something else disturbing. Humans were learning at an accelerated rate. Tactics that worked against us once rarely worked twice. Technologies that gave them an advantage would be neutralized within days, sometimes hours. A Vraxian commander's log, later recovered from a downed ship, contained this observation: the humans don't fight like a military force. They fight like an immune system, adapting to each threat, remembering it, and ensuring it never works again. This adaptive capability led to what Vraxian military historians would later call the cascade, a rapid series of human victories that fundamentally altered the course of the war. First came the Battle of the Kenyan Shield Array, where human forces captured an intact Vraxian defensive system. Within 2 weeks, reverse-engineered versions began appearing around critical human installations. Next was Operation Thunderstrike, where a coordinated EMP attack disabled Vraxian communications across an entire hemisphere for 6 crucial hours. By the time they restored their systems, 17 of their forward operating bases had been destroyed. But perhaps most shocking to the Vraxians was the human willingness to sacrifice their own environment for tactical advantage. When Vraxian forces established a major ground base in the Amazon basin, Brazilian special forces diverted an entire river to flood them out, destroying thousands of square miles of rainforest in the process. When questioned about the environmental damage, the operations commander reportedly said, "We can regrow trees. We can't regrow humanity." This willingness to accept any cost for victory was something the Vraxians had never encountered and had no defense against. As the physical conflict intensified, humans opened another front that the Vraxians were completely unprepared for: psychological warfare. Vraxian society was highly structured, with clear hierarchies and protocols. Their military operated on precise orders and predictable patterns. This made them extraordinarily efficient, but also vulnerable to an enemy that deliberately introduced chaos into the battlefield. Human forces began exploiting this vulnerability with disturbing effectiveness. They would establish patterns of behavior, wait for the Vraxians to adapt, then radically change tactics. They would send contradictory signals, fake retreats, and create elaborate deceptions that violated all conventional military logic. One particularly effective strategy involved human operators who had learned to mimic Vraxian communication protocols. They would infiltrate enemy channels and issue false orders, sometimes subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but significant enough to disrupt operations. But perhaps the most effective psychological tactic was something humans didn't even do deliberately. They kept fighting when, by all rational calculation, they should have surrendered. The Vraxian military doctrine was built on cost-benefit analysis. When the cost of resistance exceeded the benefit, surrender was the logical choice. But humans didn't operate on this calculus. Even when victory seemed impossible, they continued fighting, and this fundamental irrationality, from the Vraxian perspective, made us unpredictable and terrifying. A captured Vraxian officer, when interrogated about their invasion strategy, expressed genuine confusion. "We calculated that after suffering 30% population loss, any species would surrender to prevent further casualties. But you fight harder as your losses increase. It defies all strategic logic." What the Vraxians failed to understand was that humans don't just fight for survival. We fight for vengeance. And with each atrocity they committed, they weren't breaking our will. They were creating a debt that would be paid in full. As the war progressed, stories of human resilience and ferocity began spreading through the Vraxian ranks. Soldiers reported humans continuing to fight despite catastrophic injuries. They described civilian populations that would destroy their own cities rather than let them fall into Vraxian hands. They spoke of human prisoners who seemed to fear failure more than death. These stories evolved into something approaching superstition. Vraxian troops began to fear night operations because humans see in darkness. They developed rituals to protect themselves from human disease weapons. Some even refused orders to engage small human units, believing them to be traps. The Vraxian High Command dismissed these fears as battlefield hysteria. But as their casualties mounted and their strategic position deteriorated, even they began to question their understanding of the species they had so grievously underestimated. 8 months into the war, the balance had shifted decisively. Human forces had reclaimed most of Earth's surface. Vraxian ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Supply lines from their home systems were under constant attack. But humanity wasn't content with merely defending Earth. The unanimous resolution that had declared total war included one other critical element. This conflict will be pursued to its ultimate conclusion, ensuring that no such threat can ever emerge again. In practical terms, this meant taking the war to the Vraxians themselves. Using captured Vraxian ships and reverse-engineered technology, human forces launched their first extrasolar strike against a Vraxian forward base in the Alpha Centauri system. The attack was led by an international coalition of military personnel, but also included civilians with specialized knowledge, linguists, xenobiologists, engineers, all volunteers willing to risk a one-way journey. The Vraxians had never considered the possibility of a counter-invasion. Their home systems were protected, certainly, but primarily against established spacefaring civilizations with conventional military doctrines. They weren't prepared for human tactics, for suicide missions, for fighters willing to take 10 casualties to inflict one, for strategies that prioritized long-term victory over immediate survival. As human forces pushed deeper into Vraxian territory, they encountered something unexpected. Civilian populations that had been told nothing about the true nature of the war. The Vraxian government had described the Earth campaign as a simple pacification of a primitive species, a routine expansion of their dominion. These civilians were shocked to learn that their military was being defeated, that their supposedly invincible forces were retreating on all fronts. More significantly, they were horrified by the atrocities committed in their name. This revelation created internal pressure that the Vraxian leadership couldn't ignore. Public demonstrations, unprecedented in their strictly controlled society, began demanding an end to the conflict. Military recruitment plummeted. Supply production faltered as workers engaged in subtle sabotage. Faced with both external military defeat and internal social collapse, the Vraxian High Command finally did what they had thought unthinkable. They opened surrender negotiations. The terms humanity offered were non-negotiable. 1. Complete withdrawal of all Vraxian forces from Earth and its solar system. 2. Reparations for all damage caused, to be paid in technology transfers and resources. 3. Trial of all military and political leaders responsible for the invasion, and especially for the destruction of Shanghai. 4. Permanent demilitarization of the Vraxian fleet with human observers stationed throughout their territory. 5. Regular tribute in the form of knowledge, resources, and technology for a period of not less than 100 Earth years. These terms were harsh by any standard, effectively reducing a once proud empire to a client state. But the alternative was clear: continued war until the complete dismantling of Vraxian civilization. Faced with extinction, the Vraxians accepted humanity's terms. The Earth-Vraxian War lasted 14 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. In that time, humanity suffered losses that would have broken most species. Over 800 million dead, countless more injured, and environmental damage that would take generations to heal. But we survived. More than that, we emerged as something new, a unified Earth with technology centuries beyond what we had possessed before the invasion, and a reputation that would echo across the galaxy. In the decades that followed, humanity's standing in galactic politics underwent a remarkable transformation. Species that had previously ignored Earth now sent diplomatic missions. Trade agreements were offered on surprisingly favorable terms. Territorial disputes that might have involved human space were settled quickly and peacefully. The reason was simple: no one wanted to be the next Vraxians. Stories of the war spread through interstellar communications channels, often growing in the telling. Humans were described as relentless, unpredictable, and perhaps most tellingly, willing to burn their own worlds to win. Some accounts claimed that humans had developed weapons that could destroy stars. or that we could continue fighting even after death. While these stories were exaggerations, Earth's governments made no effort to correct them. The fear they generated was a form of security. But humanity didn't rely solely on reputation for protection. The hard lessons of the Vraxian invasion led to the establishment of the Earth Defense Initiative, a global organization dedicated to identifying and neutralizing potential threats before they reached our solar system. Using Vraxian technology as a foundation, human scientists developed monitoring systems that could detect approaching ships at unprecedented distances. Weapons platforms were positioned throughout the solar system, hidden among asteroids and moons. Military training incorporated xenobiological studies and adaptive combat techniques specifically designed for non-human opponents. Perhaps most significantly, humanity maintained a state of constant readiness. The unified Earth government established protocols ensuring that industrial capacity could be converted to military production within days. Civilian education included basic combat training and survival skills. Research into advanced weapons technologies continued unabated, despite the absence of immediate threats. As one Earth Defense Initiative commander put it, "The Vraxians caught us unprepared once. There will not be a second time." The story of humanity's response to the Vraxian invasion has become something of a cautionary tale throughout the galaxy. It is studied in alien war colleges, discussed in diplomatic academies, and whispered about in the corridors of power on 1,000 worlds. The lesson is simple but profound. Humans don't fight like other species. We don't calculate acceptable losses or maintain proportional responses. When truly threatened, we don't just fight to win, we fight to ensure the threat can never rise again. In the centuries since the war ended, humanity has expanded cautiously into nearby star systems. We've established colonies, built trading outposts, and engaged diplomatically with dozens of alien civilizations. To most observers, we appear to have returned to our pre-war focus on cultural development and scientific advancement. But beneath this peaceful exterior lies the infrastructure of a species prepared for total war at a moment's notice. Our ships, ostensibly designed for exploration, can be converted to military use within hours. Our colonies, while primarily civilian, contain hardened bunkers and weapons caches. Our diplomatic corps includes specialists trained to identify potential threats before they materialize. Perhaps the most telling evidence of humanity's transformation can be found in the galactic archives, specifically in the classification system used to categorize potentially dangerous species. Before the Vraxian War, humans were listed as Class 3, limited threat potential. Today, we occupy a category of our own, Class 0, approach with extreme caution. The official explanation for this classification reads, while generally peaceful and open to diplomatic relations, human response to perceived existential threats is disproportionate to an extent that defies conventional strategic analysis. Conflict with human populations should be avoided at all costs. It would be easy to view this reputation as something to be ashamed of, to see ourselves as the monsters of the galaxy, feared rather than respected. But there's another perspective worth considering. In the wake of the Vraxian defeat, dozens of subjugated species regained their independence. Trade routes once monopolized by the Dominion opened to free commerce. Scientific knowledge, previously restricted to maintain Vraxian superiority, became widely available. Humanity's response to aggression, while terrible in its intensity, created a more balanced and equitable galactic community. Our willingness to fight beyond all rational limits serves as a deterrent that protects not just Earth, but countless other worlds that might otherwise fall victim to the next would-be conqueror. As we look to the stars today, we do so not just as survivors, but as guardians of a hard-won peace. The price we paid was immeasurable, but the message we sent echoes across the cosmos. Threaten humanity at your peril. We are not just another world to be conquered. We are Earth. and we will defend our home, our people, and our future with everything we have, and then find more to give. The Vraxians learned this truth too late. Let their fate serve as a warning to any who might follow in their footsteps. Earth stands ready. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this scenario. What do you think makes humans unique in how we respond to threats? Would other intelligent species react the same way, or is there something distinctly human about our capacity for total war? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love discussing these scenarios with you all. And if you enjoyed this exploration of humanity's potential response to alien aggression, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I release new videos exploring humanity's place in the cosmos every week, and I'd hate for you to miss any of them. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the vastness of space, humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our numbers. It's our absolute refusal to accept defeat. See you in the next video.